afternoon.
And I'm back here for Santa Clarita Organization for Planning and the Environment. You know, we've been commenting on this issue for 15 years. We participated in the coalition of groups that tried to negotiate an alternative settlement that all the water boards signed on to, and I believe the city signed on to that in 2008. And it's discouraging because it seems like one side gets consistently presented to this board and to the community, and then there's another side that is consistently not presented. And so I think that it's created a situation where people don't see the full picture. You know, the Clean Water Act says that you're not supposed to increase the amount of an effluent or chemical that you're putting into a river or stream that's above the baseline of the river or stream. Well, the baseline of the Santa Clara River is 100 milligrams. So there's a process called anti-degradation where you can go back and look and see if, okay, you put in 150 milligrams, will that degrade those 7 beneficial uses anywhere on the river? And it has to look at on the river. It has to look at all of the beneficial uses. So they went through this process and they found that upstream, like in Vista Canyon area or something like that, yeah, it wouldn't matter if you put in 150, but if you're putting it in downstream where the Piru Basin is already having a substantial increase in chloride levels, that it will make a difference. So they said to the sanitation plants, after considerable, through this whole degradation, anti-degradation process, which the submittal took several years, the coalition took several years to look at all these documents, that this is what we'll come out with as a compromise at 117. And we'll give you that 117 if you follow a time schedule. And if you don't follow the time schedule and stick to your agreement, then it will go back to 100. They did not follow the time schedule. They did not stick to their agreement. So it has now gone back to 100. And as we move into climate change, as we have reduced water supply from the Sierras, we will have increased salt levels in the water, imported water. The imported water is the major source of salt coming into this valley. At this point, it's not the groundwater wells. And the reason there's different places is if you have a 400 milligram release, it's probably because you have an ocean outfall and you can put it right into the ocean. That's why there's different places, different levels for different places, because if it doesn't do harm, then you can have a different level. In our area, it does harm, and we made an agreement. We're not keeping the agreement. It's time to try to move forward and fix that. So I just want to say that I support the letter that you're going to send.
Thank you, Lynn. City Manager, we want to have Mr. Newman come forward, or?
Mr. Newman and Mr. Freese.
That'd be great. Gentlemen, and while they're coming forward, I'd like to acknowledge our newest State Assembly member, Scott Wilkins, with us, and it's good to see you here with us, Assemblyman. Yes, sir.
You want me to respond to some of them?
I think that'd be very beneficial, sir.
With regard to Ms. Noltemeyer's statement that the majority of the problem is, majority of the salt is coming from the imported water, that can be the case at certain times. Right now, it's not the case. About half of the water supply is imported water and about half is groundwater. And right now, the groundwater has slightly higher chloride levels than the imported water. But these can fluctuate up and down, both imported water and groundwater. But I think in general, you have comparable amounts of salt coming from local groundwater and imported water. Right now we're discharging at about 120 milligrams per liter. About 65 is in the water supply. The community adds 45 when it uses the water, and we add 10 when we chlorinate the water to disinfect it. So that's kind of the salt makeup right now. Mr. Cameron talking about a process to use better science and get a more science-informed standard. You know, I really can't argue with that statement. You know, that's the same kind of thing we were fighting for throughout this process. You always want science to inform regulatory standards. It's an imperfect process, and what we had when we did our special studies was we had a process where the agricultural community had their experts participating, we had our experts. It was a mediated process, and it was kind of like battling experts, where the ag people were saying we need 100, and our people were saying, you know, 150 or even higher would protect the crops. And we end up with this 100 to 117 range coming out of this study. So, you know, I think it is entirely correct to say that a higher number would likely protect the crops. I just don't think it's possible in a process where you have stakeholders with different interests to always get, you know, the outcome that you're hoping for. I would say, I'm repeating myself, we fought very hard. We did not get the outcome we hoped to get on the standard. I can't say it any differently than that, but I think Mr. Cameron made comments that I generally agree with. With regard to standards that others have adopted that are higher than our 100 milligram per liter standard, he's right there, although I do not believe anybody's adopted a 400 milligram per liter standard to protect an agricultural supply use. The University of California Committee of Consultants has a general irrigation standard recommendation of 142. That's a number that some regions have used. We were hoping for that 143, a number right in that same range. I think that when Ms. Planbeck said she thought the 400 might be for somebody discharging near the ocean, she might be right about that. I don't believe the 400 is protective of an agricultural supply use, but I do believe the 150 is, and I completely believe and agree that other regions have adopted 150 to protect agriculture, and that the 100 that we're facing is an overprotective standard. I won't say otherwise. With respect to Ms. Donnelly's statement that it would be good to work with the ag folks and try to see a compromise and get a standard closer to that 115 to 120, I think that's an intelligent statement, and I think in fact that is a process that is ongoing. I think, you know, there is an effort to try to permit an alternative that would involve a discussion like that and a compromise like that. That could happen. With regard to Ms. Planbeck's remarks, you know, I think she spoke in a very informed manner about anti-degradation and the fact that when we went through the process to permit the AWRM project, they said that 150 protected all the uses in the reaches that we discharge in, and they needed 117 for the downstream reaches. Those were the site-specific objectives that were assigned to the AWRM project, but the kicker was that that project had to be built with all specific components, including the 3-MGDRO component that operated continuously. And so it was a prescriptive project with a high price tag. You know, if you could meet those numbers any way you wanted to, those would be really good numbers. But those weren't numbers that you could meet any way you want to. Those were numbers that were tied to one project that had to be operated one way, that had one price tag. That was the issue there. Those were all the notes that I made.
Thank you, Mr. Freeze.
Just that last statement that you made, could you put that in easier language to understand? I know what you were saying, but I think that's an extremely important point to bring forward. about what was required of that one ARN?
They gave us what were called conditional site-specific objectives. So they said you can discharge at the plants at 150 milligrams per liter chloride, and you have to meet in the river a receiving water standard of 117 milligrams per liter during non-drought conditions and 130 milligrams per liter during drought conditions. But to take advantage of those numbers, you have to build a project that includes a 3 MGD reverse osmosis component that operates continuously. So there was a rigid requirement in there. Those numbers were conditioned on us building a specific project that had that advanced treatment component and operating that component at full flow continuously. So we had to be pulling basically salt out of the system with that reverse osmosis plant all the time to take advantage of those numbers. That's why that facility had that $250 million price tag that made it difficult to get the public support for it. And when we tried to take advantage of improved water quality conditions that have occurred since 2008 and proposed lesser facilities but to meet the same numbers, the regional board said no, gave us notices of violation, and we are where we are now.
Go ahead, Marie.
Just since you're on the topic, the improved water from the state, could you give us where the benchmark was and where it has come to, and why you went to regional water with that information and how that came about?
During extreme droughts in the past, imported water could go to well over 100 milligrams per liter chloride, even towards numbers in the range of 120 milligrams per liter towards the end of long multi-year droughts. Due to the ecological issues in the Bay Delta, and the reason that those things could occur is as they would pump from the Delta during drought conditions when the freshwater flows were low in the Sacramento and San Joaquin River, they would induce reverse flows, backward flows of salty water towards the pumps. So they'd be sucking salty water into the pumps during drought conditions and be bringing saltier drinking water down south. And so there are these ecological problems in the Bay Delta. Everyone's heard about the Delta smelt problems and problems with salmon and other issues like that. So now there are severe pumping restrictions on the state water project, and they're not allowed to pump hard during conditions when there's low freshwater flows in the rivers. And so because of those pumping restrictions now, they don't get those severe reverse flows of salty water towards the pumps. And the projections now are that even during worst case drought conditions, we should not expect to see imported water be higher than the low 80s, something a little over 80 milligrams per liter. After Castaic Lake treats the water to disinfect it, we're using a number of 85 for our projections as the worst case imported water quality with regard to chloride. So instead of numbers well over 100, 105, even higher during drought, now we're talking about 85 being the cap. So that's 20 milligrams per liter improvement in the imported water quality during droughts. So that means that much less advanced treatment equipment to remove chloride to meet 100 milligram per liter standard, or to meet whatever standard it is that you have to meet.
Oh, just to encapsulate that, since 2008, with the Delta Smelt decision and the stopping the reverse pumping, the state water has dropped from potentially 100, 120, worst case down to 65 where it is now, and it's been pretty consistent. And that worst case scenario in a drought could go up to 85. And at the same time period, we have dropped 50, 55 milligrams MGD ourselves. So that between the two, we're averaging around 115, 120 consistently by source control. Does that sum it up?
That's correct.
Mr. Woodson?
There are several regional quality water boards across the state. Is that correct? And what is the lowest chloride level that any of those boards require when there's one in place?
I don't believe there's any number lower than ours at 100.
No, what is their lowest one? Not one lower than ours. I mean, what's
100 is the lowest.
ours is the lowest, but what's the second lowest?
There are many at 142, that range.
That range or at that? Because I asked this question before at one of the other outreaches and I didn't get an answer, so I was hopeful that the answer would be forthcoming. Because someone sent me a chart that said that they were 150, that the lowest was 150 at any of the
No, I
other
don't
regional
believe
boards.
that's correct. I believe there are water quality objectives that were just a straight adoption of the University of California Committee of Consultants 142 milligram per liter recommendation. I've seen that. It's been a long time since I've looked at those figures, so I apologize.
So 140,
I believe 142.
142 is the low end elsewhere that they believe that all of the agriculture is taken care of.
To my
And
knowledge.
ours is at 100,
There are,
basically.
yes.
Because that's a long ways away. And I just want to also thank Assemblyman Wilk for being here today. I don't think there is any issue, at least at Santa Clarita, and most Santa Claritans might not be aware of this issue, but it's a cost issue that is looming ahead of us. This billion-dollar boondoggle is the most important, and we'll need all the help we can get, Mr. Wilk, up in Sacramento, I believe, because we don't seem to be getting the help that we need right here. When we talk about the other question that I wanted to ask about was, you had said that you've done everything you could. It's the hardest fight you ever waged, et cetera, but I wanted to ask you, have we ever actually taken legal action? I mean, as a sanitation, when I said we, has the sanitation board ever taken legal action? Has the board ever sued?
On this issue, we've threatened suits twice. We've not actually sued.
Okay. I don't have any questions at this moment, but I wanted to state to my fellow council people and to the public, because this has been an odyssey, and it's a critically important one. And I believe that this whole chloride issue is one of the biggest scams that's ever been perpetrated on a group of people, and will be the largest transfer of wealth between us and the downstream agricultural interests if it takes place. And the way I came about that, it was not a formulated opinion that I just came up with. I actually went to a meeting that was put on by the sanitation board, and then I went to another meeting, and then another meeting, and it was like peeling the layers of the onion back. And I also see Mr. Alan Ferdman out in the audience, and he was at these meetings for hours and hours as we looked to try to find out what was really going on. Because it seems like this problem gets solved, but then it's not solved. And so we try to see, well, what is it? And in the first report that we had, that the organization, the sanitation board, got in front of all the people, and they said, you know what? The problem is you're hurting the strawberries. We're not going to be able to grow the strawberries. And we won't be able to grow rootstocks in the nurseries. They'll be impacted by this high salt level. And the avocados. And this is the reason why we have to build this reverse osmosis plant to take that salt out, because you know the salt kills the crops. And we're like, well, what's the federal drinking water standard? I mean, you know, it's a certain amount of salt. We all know it's not good for us. You can't go drink salt water. You'll die after a while. And so will plants if you put it on that. So the federal drinking water standard, a couple hundred milligrams per liter, something like that, in that neighborhood. But of course, it's accumulated salts. I mean, you put the salt in and it builds up and whatnot. Then you could have a problem. So we said, well, so I went home and I read this report. It's a long report, a lot of great stuff in there. And I stumbled on these things that said, you know, the scientists can't say that these levels of salt at 117 milligrams or 100 milligrams, we can't find any evidence of the damage to strawberries. So basically the report, even though the sanitation district was saying it was because of strawberries, it wasn't. The government of the worst kind. So we kept reading and found out that rootstock was not affected at these levels either. They couldn't find any evidence. So I read on, and they did find that not the fruit of the avocado, but just the leaves. Just the leaves on the trees were showing leaf burn is what they call it. But they say sometimes leaf burn is caused by heat, and that this avocado fields are way upstream. As you get closer to Santa Clarita, it gets hotter. So I said, well, does this problem go on all the way downstream? Oh no, it does not. As soon as you get to the Piru watershed, apparently the water we send down there gets diluted. And so the people down there don't have to worry about these levels because it drops way down below. So peeling the onion back, we found out, oh gosh, well, where's the good science? So I dug in and looked for the field studies. The field studies where you would go out and plant the strawberries you think are going to be hurt, or the avocados you think are going to be hurt. You know, you put in, UC Davis and those agricultural colleges where they go in and they do field studies. They plant stuff, they put stuff on there. So where are the field studies? Well, there aren't any field studies, even though we seem to have had this problem for 20 years, supposedly. And we've been fighting it really hard for years and years and years and years, and yet no field studies, and still no field studies, because these facts are not based on science. Well, then why is this whole thing taking place? Why are we having to take this salt out? Well, as we peeled the onion back and we dug into the plan, we found out that it wasn't just about building a reverse osmosis plant, but it was about taking that pure fresh water and shipping it to the strawberry farmers down on the Oxnard Plain, where they actually do have a real salt problem because they've overpumped the aquifer under the ground and the salt water from the ocean is seeping in. And once you put that on the ground, you have huge levels of salt. And the only way to get rid of it is to take pure fresh water, put it on there and dissolve the salts and take it out of the topsoil. And when I asked the sanitation district at that time, well, how much water are we going to ship down there that's going to cost these millions of dollars? And they said, well, we can't tell you how much water we're going to ship there. And I said, and what about this $40 million of water you're going to buy from the Kern River? All of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, what are you going to do with that water? Well, we're going to put it in the aquifer down here for the agricultural interest to use, because your highest levels of salt are affecting us. The problem with this whole thing is that it's not based on science. And it's not based on science. And there are no field studies that have been done. And the field studies should have been started when I jumped in, certainly, and asked for them years ago now. And prior to that, certainly much before, every single time that we've looked. Because you'd say, well, field studies are expensive. $1 billion is a lot of money. And we have this problem, and we're up against this problem. So how much can we get fined? Oh, I heard this number. It's actually, you can make it millions. You can make it hundreds of millions. I have even been told you can make it billions of dollars in fines because you take it as a per gallon amount. The point is that they are forcing us to have an unreasonable amount, an unreasonable level that is not based on science. And we need to start out. We need to start as a council, because this is obviously, the sanitation district is bigger than the city of Santa Clarita, but most of the people here in Santa Clarita, the majority of the population is here. And our people are going to pay these fines. They are going to pay and pay and pay. And it's going to be based not on science, not on what's hurting the crops, but it's going to be based on the fact that we're going to take a bunch of water and send it downstream that we should not have to do. So I'm asking the council to write a letter to contest the fine, and write a letter saying that we need to have an administrative review based on science, that we go to the Water Quality Control Board and that we use that we ask the Sanitation Board to use all legal remedies possible, to ask them to make sure that they consider our scientific evidence, and that we go and have an administrative request. Because if we're going to go, otherwise we're just going to say, oh well, you know what, everyone else has a 142 milligram and all their crops are fine, but no, we're going to make it 100 milligrams. We're going to build a reverse osmosis plant. And we can then ship the brine to the ocean if necessary. Oh, well, maybe not. Maybe we don't have to do that anymore. That 43-mile line down to the ocean, which exists nowhere in the entire world, according to the sanitation district. This is a boondoggle, and we need help to get out of it. But we have to stand up to it. As a council, I would encourage my fellow council people to write this letter and to demand that we get an administrative review, that we ask that we can make whatever we have to do, make the science true. We don't want to hurt any of the agriculture. Nobody in Santa Clarita wants to say we're ruining the crops downstream. That is not why we're here. And if it were true, it would be a problem, but it is not true.
Thank you, Mr. Boydston. Comment, Mr. Freeze?
Well, it's hard to address all that. I would say that the science certainly could support a higher standard. We argued that for a long period of time. I think 100 milligrams per liter is on the very low end of any range that any of the studies identify as being needed to protect the salt-sensitive crops. So I think it's an overprotective standard. It's more stringent than it needs to be. Again, we had a process that didn't come out with the outcome that we wanted. We had time to conduct some field studies that the regional board, when they looked at our literature review, they took the time back away from us. And then when we appealed to get the time back to the state board, they denied it. And that was the time where we just felt like the cards were stacked against us and that it was in the best interest of the district to try to move forward with the cheapest possible compliance project, to fashion the least expensive project we could, negotiate with the downstream interests, and come up with this alternative project that was based on these 150, 117, 130 numbers. The 100 is a very, very low number. I'm not sure that there isn't 100 somewhere else. There may be, I'd have to look. I can tell you that the state has set a water quality goal for protection of the agricultural use statewide of 106. So all they have to have is one study to pluck a number from. It's not a satisfying scientific process, but that's often, it seems, the way regulatory standards get set, as they just grab a number from one particular study and use that, and it turns out to be an overprotective number. So I think that it would be very satisfying to see a process where you had studies done that absolutely determine what's needed here and not end up with a standard that's tougher than it needed to be. That's kind of a perfect world. It'd be great if we could get it.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had to interrupt you. Thank you, Mr. Freeze. Mr. Newman, I invite you if you have comments. You have nothing? Marshall?
At the time that I went to Sacramento to talk to the governor's office, I asked for information as to what other districts needed to comply with, and I was told at the time that there is no other district that is required to have 100. We are the only one. If the information I was given is correct, that's what I was told, and I have charts to show it. There should be a packet somewhere of the information that was presented to the governor's office.
there are 100 milligram per liter objectives, chloride objectives in other reaches in rivers, in this river and in other rivers. But whether you have dischargers into those reaches with those kinds of permit limits, I don't know. But 100 is not a completely unique water quality objective, but I don't know of any other wastewater treatment plant with this discharge limit. I do believe that's unique.
Just one other thing I want to say. I was present with you at the regional board meetings where we asked that scientific study be completed, and we were denied.
Thank you, Mr. Freeze. Council members, any discussion on recommended action?
Yeah. Everything Councilmember Boydston stated, we all have stated, whether it's as a council member or as on the sanitation board. It came down, and Mr. Freeze is the enemy. I mean, people look at him like he's the enemy. The sanitation staff and board have significantly worked hard to make this, to change the limits, the standards, as well as to try to find mitigation in the brine line to a lower standard of remediation. So you're looking at two parties that share a similar concern. I have no problem, Councilor Boydston, if you come up with a solution and have an administrator, they're not against it. They're not in any way against it. I think it's hypocrisy that you could have to buy state water at a limit that's higher than what we have to put it back downstream. My question would be, how much water are we required to put back downstream? That's the question I would have. How much are we required? What % of our water are we required to put back into the river?
We're discharging right now from the two plants a combined total of a little less than 20 million gallons per day. Probably to maintain the habitat that exists downstream of our discharges, we would have to discharge something like 8 million gallons per day, somewhere in that 7 to 10 range. We've done some preliminary studies to try to determine that, to see what the maximum diversion for recycling could be. You know, the idea would be to see.
So we have to put the 8 to 10 down for federal guidelines, habitat.
To maintain.
You put how much total a day? What did you say?
Something like 8 million gallons per day of the 20 that we discharge today. We'd have to.
You want my opinion? You want to make this thing go away? Find a way to save your 12 million if the agriculture downstream leverage it. You find a way to put the 12 million back into your parks, your golf courses, and keep the water you're cleaning, and all of a sudden they're going to be high and dry, and you're going to see them being a partner in solving this. They need our 20 million gallons a day.
Yeah, there's some real attractiveness to that strategy. The issue generally is if you're using it mostly for irrigation, that irrigation demand is very, very low during the winter.
Well, we'll flush every toilet with the water we clean. What I'm saying is, if they piss us off enough, you're going to get the Italian bird. And I think that's where the community's going. I think that's where we're all at is, we're not going to get fined $200 million. We're not going to build a $250 million brine. So fine, you'll get your 8 million. But the other 12 million gallons, we'll find uses. We'll make it happen. We'll spend our money that way. Right? And all of a sudden you're going to see people come to the table that weren't coming to the table before. I mean, you're having terrorism downstream. Well, how do you do it? You bring back some bargaining power. We have zero right now. So.